You might recall in episode 6 where I was talking about the giant Pacific fat trucks and the logging work they do. I especially noticed that they have water drums to drip water onto the brakes. Now there's water on the tracks here, and what the water does is it drips onto the brakes just like they did back in the day to help keep the brakes cool. As you can see on the back of the trailer there, they're all damp and wet, and it's the water doing that, keeping the brakes cool. It was certainly a memorable trip, and to have the opportunity to actually ride in one was one of my bucket list items, well and truly ticked off. Amazing. So let's get on with our water story. Shortly I'm going to be talking to Bruce Edkins about the logging industry of the 50s and 60s, especially focusing on the braking systems of the trucks of that time. But before I do that, I'd like to give you a brief summary of the logging industry insofar as the trucks are concerned leading up to the 50s and 60s, based on what people have told me during the time we've been making this show. Ever since the first settlers came to New Zealand, they discovered the native trees, especially the kauri. Almost immediately they started milling the timber, and getting the timber out of the forest and to the mills was done by a variety of methods, using bullock teams to drag it out. Then as time passed, as you may have seen a few weeks ago, the load started to go on trucks. And the trucks of the early 20th century really had to work hard, as you can see by these photos. And the engines of these old trucks, as you've seen in recent programs, were only minimal horsepower, and brakes were practically non-existent. Now here's an interesting photograph, obviously taken sort of 1918, 1920, that period. But the truck's on a ramp. You can see the wooden ramp. It's been shaped at both ends, so the left-hand side of the truck can easily go up, but it's on a bit of an angle. And the reason for that is they can just let it roll off the other side. You can see the logs to the left of the photograph, and obviously that ramp is to angle the truck. So when they pull the wedge out, the logs will just roll off. Then they just drive off again. Now, I just like to digress a wee bit and just take you forward 40 years just to show you that nothing's new, really. Pretty basic, but the system works. Now moving back to where we come up into the early 40s and heading to the 50s, but still these logs were just absolutely enormous, and even these KB Internationals, they'd be struggling up the hills with those. And again, the brakes, well, what brakes? And after the war there was a surplus of GMCs and Internationals, and a lot of firms in forestry decided that they would buy the GMCs because of their 6-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive and turned them into loggers. You might remember what Snow Brown had to say about this period. So when did you get it?
I bought it off a cousin, Frank Brown, who had Delta Timber Company in Ngaruawahia, and it was carting logs at the time. And I carried on carting logs with it for some 6 years.
And the tonnage of it? What's it
well, it was weighed up at one stage by a traffic officer because we were grossly overweight.
So what's the rating of the truck?
It's a 1.5 ton truck, and it was with the jinker, it was pulling 28 imperial ton.
He must have loved you, that cop.
Yeah. Yes.
Just tell us about what the work was like in there, the roads.
Well, the bush roads were only clay roads. You could only work in the dry weather, and we'd do 3 trips to Delta Timber Company per day from Karakariki on the Hamilton Raglan Road. There was a side road went off into Karakariki, but we always did 3 loads per day from that bush.
So
each.
Is that so? What's that? About 3 hours to get from one end to the other, give or take?
Yes, it would be a good 3-hour trip, and sometimes longer when
So it's 14 miles in 3 hours.
they put a big log on you, a log a load, some of them. Others were 2 and 3 loads, 2 and 3 logs per load. But yes, and sometimes the logs were so long they'd be wanting to be pushed off by hitting the bank as you went around the corners, hitting the bulldozed road bank, and your heart would be in your mouth, in other words.
Did you have to get pushed out? Well, I mean, Uncle Harry was
Yes, we did at times. We had to get pushed up, lowered down hills and pulled up hills when it was before the road got rolled, and then we were able to climb up by their own power.
They hardened up the clay, yeah. So on a wet day, it was all over. You just didn't.
It was all over. You laid in bed and enjoyed a little sleeping.
Good on you, Snow. Then we move into the early 1950s, where all you could buy really was English trucks, and the Leyland stood out as one of the more powerful of the period, and the loggers moved into the Leylands. Mind you, the Ford V8s and the Chevs, the Bedfords, particularly the S Bedfords, were also popular. The new shape comma was produced in 1949, and it too came on the logging scene in the 1950s, as did of course the old International. In the late 1950s, the International R190s arrived, and this particular truck certainly carved a niche for itself in the history of New Zealand logging. This old girl's just been lying around and remembering the old days, so I'd like to show you now some old footage of what it was like back in the day. The old R190 was certainly a hard-working truck, but like most other trucks of the time, the brakes were always something the drivers worried about. Now let's join Bruce Edkins and talk about one of the popular braking solutions of the time. With me is Bruce Edkins, and welcome to the show, Bruce. And Bruce is one of the old identities around the Turangi, Taramanui areas, and Bruce, my Uncle Harry used to pull logs out of Minganui. And they had old Leylands, and he bought about 1958 Mercedes. He had commas and some old Internationals. But all of those trucks had their, as you probably know, all had the inherent problem of brakes. And over in this district, you had your own problems with going down those big, long, steep hills that just go on and on and on and on and on.
That's right.
And go round and round, and you've got about that much brake to sort of try and slow you down. So Uncle Harry was saying that he didn't know who, but somebody came up with the idea, and they incorporated it as well, of having a water tank on the back of the truck with some pipes that sort of just drip water onto the brake drums to try and cool them down a bit. So the time you got to the bottom, the brakes were reasonably cool. But did you ever have anything to do with that?
Well, I never had anything to do with the actual, when it was first thought out, but as time went on, from when it was first thought of, perhaps if I start at the beginning might be an idea. There was, the guys used to take off from the top of the panga.
The panga being a hill between Turangi and Tauranga.
Top of the Waituri Tree.
Oh, yeah.
And down, and when they came to part of the road that we used to call the tank trap, they stopped and let their brakes cool down. Well, that part was all right, but as they found when they take off, the brakes got hotter and hotter and hotter, and they found that every day or every week they were relining one brake shoe, and it went round through the truck. Every week was a new set of linings. Not a full set of linings, but the ones, So this day they pulled up there, and there was quite a few trucks sitting there waiting, to cool their brakes down. And a guy by the name of Doug Haddon. Now Doug was, quite an old guy in the area, and was here for a number of years. As things went on, he went to the ministry works, but Doug walked around the front of the truck and he wanted to go to the toilet, and he piddled on the wheel, and steam went up everywhere, and he said, now if only we could control that somehow and get that onto the brake drums, we would have,
Cool brakes.
cool brakes. Now the guy by the name of Basil Leproux was there at the time, as this is that I've heard it, the story was told to me. And he went home and thought, now, get some water there and put it through a bit of a hose, and we'll put a tank on the back. And so he tried it with a tank, with just an ordinary a 12-gallon drum, but he only put it on the front axle. And his brakes on his front axle, the next trip or the next 2 or 3 trips were good as gold.
When he got to the bottom.
Yeah, when they got to the bottom. But the others were burnt out because they never had water on them. So then he thought, well, what we've got to do is try and carry more water and run it to the back. So they tried that, and then they went to Laurel and Rice with the engineers in Tamanui in those days. They later became Wakeland Engineering, and there was 1 or 2 guys there who were very interested in this system and what was going to happen and how it was going to happen and all the rest of it. So they started doing a lot of experimenting, and of course plastic pipe had just come out in those days too. So they decided with the plastic pipe, and it was found that the plastic, with going around the exhaust pipe and up over the motor and whatnot, the plastic got soft, and of course when it cooled off, it had split, and all the water wouldn't do its job. So they had to go back to the rubber. And as time went on, they found that the water, when it was squirted in from we used to call them water jets, and it was shaped a certain way. The hose came up here, and then the hose went in off to the left. We'll take the left front wheel as an example, and the water squirted in there over the top of the drum. And somebody had a brilliant idea and thought, now, and I don't know where this came from, but thought, now, the water's not staying on that drum, not long enough. It's flying off. So they, through experiment and error, they just kept taking the jet backwards, and they finished up at around about 10 o'clock, between 10 and 11 o'clock on the drum, on the round brake drum, and the water didn't fly off, it stayed there and went round the drum, and that's how it worked. Oh. And all it was well, it got into the days they had got into 44-gallon drums, and then 2 44-gallon drums, and
Just strapped to the back of the cab.
just strapped there, and then they then of course they went for a vehicle inspection, and the vehicle inspector said, "Here, bloody hook them up properly, or or take them off, or whatever." And it was all the whole thing was all experiment. And some guys, a guy by the name of Frankie Actor, he designed a lot of, and he worked for Laurel and Rice, and he designed a lot of the jets. And he finished up Frankie finished up as a mechanic to Eric Deadman. And he's gone now, poor Frankie, but he thought about it a lot. He was a very clever guy. He had quite a bit of Hindu blood in him, and he was, a good engineer. He used to think about things. Anyway, he got the idea of this drum squirting, and then he thought, now, if we could hold the pressure of the water there, why not just have it out of one hole underneath? And that's how they finished up, with a flat thing that had a bend in it, and it went in, and then underneath it had about a quarter hole. And the water said, it held its pressure up, and it just squirted on that drum at around about 10, 11 o'clock on the drum, and it just held there, and it kept them cool.
Well, here I am in the cafe, and it's just like going back to 1950. The chairs of the time, Formica I think it's all called, and the black and white floors. There's Elvis Presley over there, there's a jukebox over there, there's memorabilia behind me, that beautiful montage of cars behind me. There's even an old Dodgem. Remember the Dodgems that they used to show? Boom, boom, boom. Wonderful. And I'm having a big breakfast. It's bacon and eggs. And so if you come here with your group to have a look at the museum, you can sit down and have a wonderful meal before you even start. So look at that. Bacon and eggs, sausages, tomatoes, toast, mushrooms, the whole 9 yards. And a cup of tea to wash it all down. So there you go. When you come here, come and have a meal first and then enjoy yourself in the museum. Christmas isn't all that far away, and so if you're looking for a present for the truck driver or somebody interested in transport in your life, then my Talking Trucks book might be just the thing. So if you'd like a copy, just email me, billhohepper@extra.co.nz, and I'll take your details and I'll get a copy in the post to you. Now this book covers trucks basically heading back from about 1972 to the time they started making vehicles. So a good historical book, and tells you all about the New Zealand transport industry up until about 1972. So for a Christmas present, perfect. Email me, billhohepper@extra.co.nz. Would you like to come and catch a pig with me tomorrow?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Excellent. Did it have copper pipe at all?
Yeah, these were made of copper.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
fed by rubber.
Yeah, and a rubber hose.
Oh,
It had
okay.
to be a rubber hose because the plastic
Just
used to
split.
break. Yeah, split them.
But they also had to do a bit of, being able to move rather than being rigid.
Oh yeah, they couldn't be. Yeah. And they also had underneath them we had a piece of angle iron with a slot in it, welded on the backing plate, and underneath the jet had a little bolt, screwed on, so you could take it off and clean it out.
Oh, okay.
Because they used to get in the bush roads and that sort of thing. There was a lot of mud and slush, and especially around the skids, and the mud used to stay in the wheel, and they'd knock them off, and all sorts of things happen. And you could always tell coming down with a punga, we called it, but going down the hill was the logging truck in the front of it, because you see the marks on the road, watermarks. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And you could tell his right hand front wheel's not working properly, or his back one. Then we used to go past and give him a yell and say to him, "You got a hose blocked or something." They soon find out, of course.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
But it was there was an outfit came in about 1940. They bought a 1946 Chef, and it had a double back end thing. And General Motors brought it into the country, and it was going to be the answer for logging trucks, absolute answer. And it had a setup like a galleon grader, had a chain driven from one diff to drove the two, and that they had around the drums another outer case, and it had water in that. but it didn't work because it just evaporated. They had to have the water. It had to have it running on, but it had to run on a certain spot, a certain place, and it had to have pressure there to hold it, to make the water stay on the drum, and it had to have enough water. It was quite bad actually if you had a hose that was only one jet that wasn't working properly because it just heated up that brake shoe and it just tore the line into smithereens. But it worked. It absolutely, yeah. We had them on all the general carriers had them. I had them on my trucks. In fact, I bought one. I just can't remember the year. In the early '60s, I think it was. I bought a comma, a TS3 comma, and before I put it on the road, I built a tank across the back of the cab, and the water and everything was all set before I even put it on the road.
From day one?
Day one, yeah.
We're talking to, you may have seen it, but I was talking to Graham Poulter a couple of shows back, and he said they weren't working. He turned the taps on at the top of the hill, but the truck just lost it and ran away on it. Yeah. Do you have any runaways going down that you know of going down that punga?
Well, in our book that we just got out, this one there, it shows him that a leyland of Tamawhana Timber Company that Joe Kahu drove, and he's come down the hill just before the tank trap, and his brakes ran away, and he went straight, he stuck it in over the bank and stayed across the road.
Sure.
And in the same spot, Reg Porter had a big crash there with one of Deadman's trucks. Somebody had, I think it was a Rio or something, but it's petrol anyway. Somebody plugged his petrol the night he'd left the truck up the road and had pinched his petrol, and when he went to change down, the way she went. But he jumped out and left that and broke both his legs. But that was a bad crash. But the roads were windy and rough, and everybody knew where every bump was on the road and that sort of thing. But they also knew where the deep water tables were. And if they got into trouble, they'd just slam them straight into the water table, straight into the bank.
And yes, guys in the logging trucks, anyway, sort of taking, they run out of brakes, they're taking to the bolsters to the side of the bank to try and
slow them down.
Yeah. You've got a plan A, plan B, and an anchoring a plan C, as I always say.
Yeah, chuck the anchor out the back.
Well, I've come into the museum now, and just looking around, there's all sorts of cars from the 50s and 60s, 30s. There's a couple of 20s in here even, and it's a magnificent collection. So there's lots and lots of stuff in this museum for you to look at, lots and lots of stuff that's going to take you right back to the day. And if you're new, well, there's lots of stuff here about New Zealand history. So if you come here, you're coming to Railside Place, which is off Rifle Range Road in Hamilton. Certainly worth a look if you belong to a car club or some sort of a club and you want a place to go. This is the place to come, and you can start off with a meal in the cafe. Come and have a look, enjoy yourselves. I absolutely recommend it.
A man called Lockie Griffin in one of our very first shows had an exhaust brake system. All he did was just top of the hill, he just shoved this sort of blocking device through the exhaust, so he'd come down on, and he said he got it to bed 20 minutes earlier.
You'd had a big day, and this would be 10, 11, 12, or even 2 o'clock in the morning, and you think, oh goodness. But I'd grown up in the old school that were taught. You came down the hill in a gear that you'd normally go up it in, which meant you had to go right down. We only had the old Leyland here in the background, 4-speed box, and so you were in second gear and getting pretty frustrated. You wanted to get home to bed. And I'd read in an article somewhere about an exhaust brake, and so I started making some inquiries, and some was very negative. Some, oh no, you ruin your motor, you don't do that. But we did a study on it, and the Steel brothers were the agents, the big truck bodybuilders, and they were keen to get somebody to have a go at it, and they said, well, there's no better place than probably over on the Banks Peninsula.
There's certainly plenty of hills here.
And boy, oh boy, we go up a gear. We go up a gear, quite safe, and would ease up, using your wheel brakes. So, yeah, it was. Unfortunately, the first one we put on was SGV, and it was a butterfly. In the all you did really was cut off the fuel. You turned your motor into a compressor. Simple as that. And but the butterfly used to jam. And when I got off the foot of the hill, although he'd put her off on the lever, she'd still be jammed on. So I'd have to get out and crawl underneath and pull the lever down. And I said to the missus, no good. So they said, look, no, we've got a later model, a better one. And it was like a damper, just a flue damper. It shot, and all the active parts are on the outside, so it was always very flexible. Yeah, that was quite innovative. And of course today, the far superior with the holding power, Jake's brakes and all sorts of retarders.
So did you have to sort of put it in, sort of activate it at the top? Did you have to get out of the truck to?
No, she's come on all right. It was just still on the old truck there. Just pull the lever down. It was worked on vacuum, and but it used to jam. As I said, when you came off the bottom, unfortunately, until we put the modified on one, then there was no trouble. No, it was a wonderful invention.
Well, we used to love getting hold of pedigrees fellas at the top of the hill and then just taking off and leaving them. That catch us going up the hill, and they knew the road, but we had water on our brakes.
Oh,
and it made such a difference. You got no idea, really. Yeah. But their braking system now, in the Napier Taupo, I think most of the logging trucks now have all got retarders on them. And I think they work good. I've never had anything to do with them, but I understand they work very, very well.
Very well, yeah. Well, I've always been wanting to know about the source of the water system on the trucks, and now I've got it all from the horse's mouth, as it were. And so there you go. Now, if you've had any experience, or with the water carrier on the back, or you've still got a truck with one on it, we'd love to hear from you. And Bruce, thank you very, very much.
That's all right. Yeah. Good stuff.
So there you go. You might remember last week Robbie Caulfield went through the twin sticks for us. Well, this week we've got Paul McNay, and if you watch carefully, you'll notice he's not even using the clutch.